welcome to the Halava Fantasy Football League. This is the Week 7 recap. My Lions got blasted. That's okay. We carry on. My drink today is, I don't know, I just made it up. But this is actually one of my favorite things to drink. It's just a shot of espresso. Made over a cube of demerara sugar and then vodka. It's one of my favorite things to drink, actually. Super simple to make, but I like it. Okay. Yeah, so it was a heavy bye week. So a lot of guys had to scramble to make some changes. And then there's some other trends that popped up, but I can't be bothered to figure out what they were because after watching the Lions get demolished, I really couldn't care about football for the whole weekend. But we muster on. So, let's look at the scores. The first one, obviously, as my team reflects the Detroit Lions, I got beat by Gary, 82.7 to 121.56. A little bit closer projections. I think most people figured the Lions would do better than Baltimore, but with a 38-6 score, and then me playing 6 Detroit players, it is what it is. So Jameson Williams gave me a donut. He dropped a touchdown pass, and I don't know, it was just kind of a microcosm of how bad it was. But in spite of that, I had a lot of good performances from some of the other guys. Jared Goff didn't do so hot, not throwing any touchdowns and having an interception, but he did throw the ball a lot, and some of the beneficiaries was Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had 13 receptions, so he did decent. Jahmyr Gibbs had his breakout game, 68 rushing yards, 58 receiving yards, and a really nice long rushing touchdown. That bodes well going forward. He's healthy, but I think the Lions need Montgomery back for them to do well. Algier was a beneficiary of a mysterious disappearance of Bijan Robinson, and that kind of helped me out. And then Laporta had a decent game. Ridley was the other big question mark. Was that a Thursday night game? He kind of like vanished too. He's another one who was like, what happened? He had one reception for 5 receiving yards. I did see like a really nice non-catch on the sideline, but it didn't count. And then obviously if Detroit's going to give up 38 points, I got negative points from them. Off my bench, I should have probably played George Pickens, who had a nice strong game, but other than that, I was not winning this game. It was not my gate day, and it was not Detroit's day. Gary fared much better. Geno Smith, he's been kind of mediocre. Puka Nacua is back, 154 receiving yards. So, kind of an interesting case. Like we've been talking about it, right? How back and forth with when one receiver does really good, what does that do for the rest of the team? And so in this case, even though Nacua had a down week last week, he did much better this week. Waddle kind of came back down to earth a little bit after a double-digit game last week, and Jacobs has been painful. Early returns looks like he's robbed the Raiders, got his money, and now he's just fat and taking it easy. Kareem Hunt busted out. They had a really big shootout, and I think he's also the beneficiary of Ford. I think Ford got hurt too, and Kelsey had a huge game, 179 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, so almost a 30-point game, really pushing Gary up nicely. And then Javonte Williams had a decent game as well. Off of his bench, There's Ford who also got hurt. So kind of interesting how you chose Hunt over Ford. I don't know. I think in most cases, more people are starting Ford over Hunt. So it was interesting that you made the decision to start Hunt, and then their scores are very nearly identical. But that was just interesting. It didn't really hurt you. And then other than that, Dubs had a 10 pointer. And yeah, so congratulations to Gary. We go head to head in fantasy this week. Our teams go head to head next week on Monday Night Football, so that'll be interesting to watch. Eric versus Aaron. Eric loses this one. Aaron bounces back and gets another win. With Fields out, he's forced to pick up Baker Mayfield and start him. And he did okay. Kind of went head to head with Trevor Lawrence. Him having a little bit more passing yards, and then Lawrence having a little bit more rushing yards. You guys also kind of like equaled out at the first receiver spot. Flowers had 75 receiving yards. Olave had 57 receiving yards with 7 catches. Just a few more catches. Evans gets the edge over McLaurin. Eckler, ooh, I don't know what happened to him. He's another like first round back who just hasn't been doing well. We just talked about Josh Jacobs. Now we're talking about Austin Eckler. I don't know what happened. Aaron Jones too, but a little bit to be expected because he's a little bit more on the older side. Najee Harris had a nice game. This might be one of the best games that he's had in a minute. A lot of single digit games. This is his best game thus far. And bad scores from Michael Mayer. You should have kept Kincaid. You went and got the other tight end, and Kincaid finally broke out. Elliott did okay, and then the Buffalo D, I don't know what happened to them. They surprisingly took a L to New England. And then for Aaron's starters, besides who we just already mentioned, Freeman got him 66 rush yards, 12 rushing attempts. George Kittle had a nice 10-point game. Why is there fireworks? Pittman Jr., strong game. I heard he was like complaining about the offense that he's getting, but he had a good game. 83 receiving yards and a touchdown. I mean, I guess it was only 2 catches, so I guess he's maybe expecting a lot more. Happy for the fantasy owners, though. Tucker had an okay game, and then the Kansas City D hits that 10-point mark. Off the bench, as you can see, Eric was hit strong by a bye, and his only other player was Jalen Warren. Herbert is still on IR, and then for Aaron, he had a couple on buys. Fields is obviously hurt. Hollywood Brown was not so good. Palmer had a nice strong game. I don't know if you could have played him instead of like he would have outplayed Olave for sure. But Aaron gets the win. Eric gets bumped down to 4-3. Next up, Darren gets back on the winning track, knocking off Mike L. A really big, strong game from Patrick Mahomes. This is kind of like the Patrick Mahomes score that we're used to seeing in past years. I think when you take a look at how he's been, that's not what I wanted to click on. When you take a look at how he's been, what did we click on? Oh, here. Historically, he was solid, right? Hits the 20 pointers, close to a 30. Underwhelming 17, 22, 21, and then finally, boom, 38. That's kind of like the winning quarterback play that you expect from someone like Patrick Mahomes. So, I don't know. If they start to roll now, then that might be a winning player for Darren moving forward. The rest of your scores, McCaffrey had a strong game, even though they lost, surprisingly, to Minnesota. And Taylor, finally starting to round out into form. So after a few underwhelming weeks, he finally has a nice 75 rush game and a rushing touchdown, and then a bunch of receiving yards too, 45. That's really nice. David Njoku seems to be healthy now from all his facial burns, and then not much else to the scores. As far as for Mike L, Sam Howell, kind of a mediocre game, and then a down game for Ayuk. Even Adams not so hot. Ramondre Stevenson and Goddard were his better players, as well as the Baltimore D. And then you can compare also Taylor to Moss. Moss is kind of trending down. It's still like kind of an even. Um, I think it's an even split as far as snap share goes, but just so happens that Taylor performed better this week. Patterson didn't give him nothing. Um, didn't attempt any field goals. Didn't attempt an extra point. That was actually a 2-point conversion that failed. So that fails you. On the flip side, though, at least you got a good, decent game from Baltimore, stomping on Detroit. As far as the bench goes, yikes. Oh man, Deshaun Watson. That is a bad, bad player. Who knew, man? Who knew Deshaun Watson, who, like, prior to being suspended, could end up being so bad? He was like, went in for concussion protocol, and they said he was okay, and then afterwards they were like, take the rest of the afternoon off. Our backup quarterback got this, and they actually pulled off a win anyway, so it's not like they need him. Stafford did a decent game for Darren, but Mahomes, he's the one who carries you to this victory overwhelmingly. Richie versus Morgan. Morgan bounces back and gets a nice big win, and then Richie, despite Lamar Jackson like balling out, the rest of your scores just didn't help serve. Lamar Jackson was like brilliant, kind of like toyed with the Detroit defense. I partially is scheme because I watched the game. Right? I feel like Detroit played a lot too fearful. They gave the receivers too much cushion, and they were trying to contain Lamar Jackson, keep him in the pocket. They didn't want him to run. That allowed him, and then because it was a little bit too tentative and too conservative, that allowed Lamar Jackson to just pick everybody apart. 357 pass yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown. So vintage Lamar Jackson, MVP Lamar Jackson. Diggs was another strong player for you. Cleveland D was strong. And Deontay Johnson, who's back and healthy, had a decent game for you. Everyone else, not that great. And then for Morgan, what carries you to this win, despite that strong Lamar Jackson game? Not a great game by Jordan Love. Not a great game by Christian Watson, who I think got hurt. Not a great game by Osborne, despite Minnesota giving San Francisco the business. Strong scores right here in the middle. Travis Etienne, 2 rushing touchdowns. Kenneth Walker, another century rushing game. Darren Waller had a breakout game. Finally actually winning. Almost having 100-yard receiving yards, but he also tied in a touchdown. And Alvin Kamara, despite being on the losing end, had a vintage Alvin Kamara game. Jake Moody had an okay game, not so great in real life though, because he missed game. No, that's last week. Whatever the case may be, San Francisco lost 2 in a row. This is kind of wild. That's wild for a team as good as them. Seattle D okay. As far as the guys off the bench, Richie's bench, nothing but donuts. 3 of them were buys, a couple of them are injuries. And then also for Morgan, a bunch of buys, and then Desmond Ridder actually playing a little bit better than Jordan Love. But Morgan gets that win. Brownsville Jets versus mediocre Minions. So this score kind of looks backwards from what you would expect, because Jeremy came back to his juggernaut ways last week. This score is actually not that This score is still really good and respectable. It's just Mike blew you out. The big scores from Mike: Jalen Hurts, especially with those rushing touchdowns, and there's 2 passing touchdowns. Devontae Smith, still not doing as good because of AJ Brown, and DJ Moore being pretty decent despite not having a start. They had Badgett, this new rookie quarterback. So DJ Moore kind of looks like he's quarterback proof, which is pretty solid. And then Barkley back and strong. Much totally different team. It's like night and day how good this team is. Like I feel like they should have beat Buffalo last week, and they were actually able to pull a win this week. And the biggest difference from them being looking like the worst team in the league is Saquon Barkley who came back. And then his big heavy hitter was Deontay Foreman. 2 rushing touchdowns, 89 rushing yards, and a receiving touchdown. So 3 touchdowns on the day. So he's the running back baller of the week practically. TJ Hawkinson also had a really good game, 86 receiving yards off of 11 catches. It was a little controversial that game, especially when his coach was telling him to TJ go down, and then it looked like he faked the injury. They said he was hurt anyway, but it just was a weird look, and they called it out on the broadcast. Sutton had a solid game too, and Denver pulling out a win over Green Bay. And then Bass only had 2 extra points and a field goal. And then the New Orleans D, not that great. For Jeremy, consistent strong game from Josh Allen, Tyreek Hill. Pacheco had a decent game, but some of the other scores that we've been seeing, like those double-digit 20, high 20s, 30-point games from everybody else, just did not pan out this week. This is good enough to win in many of the other games, but the matchup just was not for you because Mike, I think, is our highest scorer this week. Keenan Allen, 55 receiving yards off of 4 receptions. Mostert, this is kind of a disappointing game after how much he's been dominating. I mean, look at this. 13, okay. Then 27, 43. Bad game, 5.7. 15.8, 34, 6.4. So I don't know. Is there a pattern here somewhere? Like you have like these ramp up to strong games and then all of a sudden a disappearing game? I don't know. And then Ingram had a decent game. Pacheco, pretty good game. And then off the bench, let's see, more buys affecting everyone. Gus Edwards, man. Would have been nice if you could play him, but I mean, take a look at your other running backs. They're already pretty strong. It's just the weakness was on your receiver side. And then his stat was just pretty. 1 catch off of a little dump off, because the Lions were so scared of Lamar Jackson, so he goes rumbling for 80 yards off of that 1 catch. Kirk Cousins had a big game. Not as good as Allen in terms of fantasy, but it was enough to win. But yeah, congrats to Mike. I think you are number 1 in our league now at 6-1. You just have that 1 loss that happened on the vacation. So sneaky good. Mike is sneaky good. Like it looked like Jeremy was gonna steamroll, but he got caught with 2 losses. Mike, on the other hand, has been just been solid. And then we go to our last game. Brad versus James. Brad pulls off a win after halting a slide of consecutive losses, so he finally pulls off a win. So congrats to Brad. James did not have a good game this week. I think part of that is a lot of the buy stuff. So, I mean, look at all these. Everyone is either buys or A-Chain, who's on IR, and Justin Wilson, who just hasn't been used. And then, Interesting. James didn't really have anybody on bye, but he did have a couple of injuries and some decent games off the bench. But I don't think that you're catching Brad at that point. I think the differential is a little bit too high. Tunga Viola had like a really bad game, especially. I mean, this looks like a decent game by any other quarterback, but for Tunga Viola, expect more. Cup went down this week. So last week, Cup was up, Puka down. This week, Puka's up, Cup is down. Wilson, Gibson, Pitts, not that great of a game. Rashad White had a decent game, and AJ Brown, big score, 137 receiving yards, one receiving touchdown, 10 receptions. So, not enough to close the gap with Brad. So, congrats to Brad for the win. Speaking of these guys, like Puka Nacua and Cooper Cup, and then you have AJ Brown, and then we talk about what's his name, Smith. It shows you like the dynamic between teams is different. Like, and on a team like the Rams, I think guys like Puka and Cooper Cup can coexist. They may not always have high scores across the board, but at least they alternate. On the other hand, it's been kind of weird and kind of bad for Devontae Smith because AJ Brown has just been the subject of, I don't know, seemingly tunnel vision by Jalen Hurts. AJ Brown has been the better target, so it's kind of interesting how that is. And then the other thing that I like to mention about how teams are is like, you look at how all of these upsets, like in some ways the Detroit Lions game was an upset. San Francisco losing to the Vikings is definitely an upset. The Bills losing to the Patriots, definitely an upset. So it kind of goes to show you cannot like freeze teams and freeze players because there is some parity, right? You know, you're going to catch teams who are good on a bad day. Look at like what happened to looks like Miami was just steamrolling everybody, and then they kind of got humbled by the Bills. Now the Bills has just been looking like really mediocre, and then they eventually lost. They probably should have lost last week. It's kind of it's crazy. It's really hard to predict, but it does make the games interesting. Um, but I think you have to be careful about thinking that when someone is down, they're gonna stay down. When someone is high, they're gonna stay high all the time. There's gonna be ups and downs for everyone. You just want to hope. You just hope for the guys who have a little bit more ups than downs. And then if you have one of those guys, you have someone like a Tyreek Hill. Um, you have someone like who have been the ballers. Jalen Hurts. If you have guys like that, they're definitely going to be guys that'll help you to win this league, and any fantasy league for that matter. But anyways, those are the scores for the week. As far as the player list, the league leaders, quarterback. Jalen Hurts jumps to over Josh Allen. Was Patrick Mahomes like number one last week? So these guys have been switching around. Lamar Jackson takes a big jump. Kirk Cousins takes a little bit of a jump. Tua has fallen a little bit. Goff has fallen a little bit. And then, yeah, look at that, man. Russell Wilson, if your quarterback, like, look at where he is in these rankings. It's crazy to me that he's not available. It's just, I guess, when you look at how bad Denver is, you don't want a guy like Russell Wilson. But there's going to be a time, if you do not have a backup quarterback and your quarterback is on a bye week, I mean, Russell's available. It's kind of just interesting to me. Wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, again, miles away. Diggs has been steady. Brown has been strong. Puka Nacua, really, really good. DJ Moore, another solid receiver despite having this weird up and down quarterback dynamic. Keenan Allen and Adam Thielen round out the triple-digit receivers. Running backs, McCaffrey, also miles ahead of the next guy, who's Raheem Mostert, who falls a little bit this week, but still at number 2. Etienne has been strong. Kyron Williams was really, really good until he got put on IR, but hang on to him. He might help you down the stretch later. Zach Moss has been good in Jonathan Taylor's absence, but he may be trending down as Jonathan Taylor trends up. Kenneth Walker has been solid. Swift has been kind of like middling down after kind of busting out after his debut. And then Pacheco and A-Chain round out that triple-digit running backs. A-Chain, he's a few weeks away, I think, but he's solid and he can help you down on the stretch run. So those are the running backs. And then lastly, the tight ends. Kelsey jumps up. Mark Andrews jumps up, makes a leap. Kelsey is kind of far and away now. Hawkinson and Laporta about the same. And then other than that, man, it's slim pickings for tight ends. All right. Anyways, that's the score. That's the player rankings for the week. All right. So that's all we got. So